Welcome to Divine Love Talk with Dr. Parthenia Grant, where we talk about health, well-being, and the love of the divine that exists in all of us. Now, here's your host, Dr. Parthenia Grant.
Thank you for joining us once again. I am Dr. Parthenia Grant, and I'm here with the divine Dr. Sarah Larsen, my co-host, and we have my other co-host, Kim Michaels, author and expert on the ego, joining us on Skype from Estonia. Welcome, Kim. And today we have an exciting lineup. We're going to be talking about ego traps and their antidotes. And we're going to look at ways to manage frustration, temptation, fear, and anger. Those are some of the ego traps.
And those come up at any age and at any time. And sometimes you're learning, we're sharing this, we can only change ourselves.
Absolutely.
And this is so beautiful. Once you begin changing and connecting with yourself, that change will affect everyone around you. And so life becomes easier and filled with more connectedness.
Well, thank you for segueing into that, because I wanted to open up with two very famous statements that everyone has heard of, but I think very few really take the time to go into how profound these two quotes are. The first one is the oracle at Delphi, who says, yes, "Know thyself." And I think that one comes first. And then the second one is Hamlet's, "To thine own self be true."
Yes.
So I use these in my lectures at the college, and students look at it in terms of, well, okay, how do I be true to myself? And they're usually thinking of it in terms of, oh, if I'm true to myself, then I follow the whims of my ego, and you know where that can take you.
Yeah.
And they don't know who they really are and what their purpose is in life. So trying to take those two axioms and make sense out of it for young people is a real struggle. So Kim Michaels, that's where you come in,
Yes.
being the expert on the ego. Could you open up with just a bit of information on how a young person or people of any age could begin to know thyself, who they really are, versus this persona that the ego tells us we are?
Well, when I was young, which was a very long time ago, but I still remember vaguely, I very much responded to the idea that when I was growing up, I wasn't told everything. And it was very powerful to me to realize that we actually live in a society that doesn't teach us very much about who we are.
Right.
It's one of the
Yes.
big questions in life. And we have the traditional Christian perspective, which really never told me what I needed to know.
Right.
And I'm not trying to knock Christianity, but it was just, it never satisfied my curiosity. And then we have the scientific perspective that says I'm an evolved monkey, and
Yes.
I really never looked into that, you know. This thing about me crawling around in the trees, I don't know, it didn't make sense to me. So when I started realizing that, I'm not saying I was deliberately lied to, but we just, as a society, we haven't put our resources into discovering who we are.
Almost
And
like
so
it's
I
not
realized
important.
nobody's...
Yeah.
Yeah, well, either that or somebody doesn't want you to know.
Right.
You know,
And in the past,
I
it
really
was...
think that is...
Oh, in the past, it was in the hands of our priest in our church, or in the spiritual centers, and science finally brings spiritual guidance into the hands of every man.
Well,
and
quantum physics, I would say.
Quantum physics,
Yeah.
and all of science is moving in that direction.
And I'm so happy that that's happening. But Kim, we interrupted you.
Sorry.
I know you had a cogent
No,
point.
that's okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just, as a young person, it was very, very important to me to realize that I hadn't been told the full story, and that really I couldn't expect anybody to come and tell me. Science
Yes.
wasn't going to do it, religion wasn't going to do it, so I had to try and discover this for myself. And back then, before the internet, you know, it was much harder because you had to find books or whatever. But today, there's
Yes.
there's just so many resources right at your fingertips today. And I think the main thing that meant something for me was that I was always, even as a child, I was very much aware of what's going on in the world and how many things that I just knew intuitively could not be right. I mean, I grew up in Denmark, so I learned about the Holocaust at a very early age. And you just look at those kind of things that have happened in history and you realize there must be something fundamentally wrong here. There must be something missing from our understanding of the world. And that was when I started realizing that there has to be a way for us to go beyond all of these struggles and all of these conflicts.
Okay.
And at the time, I didn't even know ego, but I realized there has to be a higher state of consciousness. And that was something I really responded to when I was younger. And ever since then, I've been on this quest to discover this state of consciousness.
Well, Kim, you and I are pretty much the same age, and I had the same struggle in terms of getting access to information. And I literally went from church to church. I started out in the Catholic Church, grew up in that, then went to Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalian. Anybody that I thought could tell me anything and who would be honest with me. I was just this bright-eyed kid. I remember like 9, 10 years old. I really, really wanted to know who I was and where was God and how does this stuff work. And everybody was saying, oh, it's a divine mystery, child. You're a little too young. When you get older, you'll understand it. And I knew as a kid that, why are you patronizing me? I really want to know. I'm reading this stuff. So I agree. I felt, Kim, that something was either not being told to me or these people just really didn't know. And a lot of them, I think, were not tapped in. And so young people today, I'm finding on a college level, they're asking the really, really meaningful questions. Why am I here? Who am I? And then when I use the Oracle at Delphi and I use the movie, The Matrix, and they go, well, how do I know? How does one know thyself?
Oh, it's such a great point that you're making with all of this, with self-reliance.
Yes.
It goes back to, for me, it was Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Oh, I love him. And I use his self-reliance essay.
Right, that self-reliance essay. And then also what it means to be your own person.
Yes.
I think children today, and many of us that had to be self-reliant, were really wondering, who am I, for a long, long time before we found the information that it was all within us.
It's true, but before you can make that journey within, and I think it's a circle, we come back to the divine self. I really think you need a bit of information. You need like access to how you can go within, like how do you meditate?
Yes.
How do you pray? There's just so much that is withheld from us. And so as a child, I finally got to the point, by the time I was 12 or 13, I said, you know what? I'm done asking adults.
Yes.
Everything I need to know, I found in a book somewhere. And I figured if they were going to hide it from you, that's the last place they figured you'd look.
Yeah.
And so I just lived at libraries. And then from there, I still love books, but I had to come full circle into, okay, all these books were doing for me was helping me re-remember what I already intuitively knew, and they were validating this sense of intuitive knowing.
Yes.
But I needed the books to kind of awaken that.
Yes.
So I don't know your journey.
Einstein, I bring it back to Einstein, said the imagination is more important, and books activate and connect
Absolutely,
us to our
fiction.
Imagination. It's
and
more
worlds
important
you've never met.
than knowledge.
Yes.
And it opens us up. And every time we read a book or even experience a show, a radio show, something that's very much tuning into yourself, you have to use your imagination.
Right.
Every time you listen to that start to finish, your brain rewires according to the author.
That's so true.
Or the creator of that program.
Yeah.
And so every time you allow input in and you filter it through the integrity of your own mind, that's the first course.
And the heart.
And the integrity of your heart.
Right.
You allow rewiring of yourself to happen. So you can problem solve in ways that the author or the show creator might problem solve based on getting the information. organize the way that they organize.
And you're actually tapping into their frequency, because I know the greatest shifts that I've ever had was from great books that I've read that have stayed with me for the rest of my life. Now, Kim, I'm sure that you have some more to add on how we can better get to know our true divine self, and then how we can be true to our divine self with all of the tricks and traps of the ego. We're going to examine that in detail for the rest of this hour. So what would you like to add to that, Kim?
Well, I'd like to pick up on what you both just said, because I found the exact same thing, that we actually get inspired on the journey whenever we need to. I mean, there is an old saying that says, when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Right.
And I feel that if you actually really open your mind and say, I've had enough of this, I want to know more,
the universe unfolds.
Then something is going to come your way. Yes,
absolutely.
You're going to find something, whether it's a book, whether it's a person you're going to meet, whatever it is, you know. Could even be a radio show you're listening to one day. But the thing that came to my mind when you were both talking is that we are actually brought up with a very strange worldview, in a sense, because we are brought up to think that when you become an adult, you are sort of locked for life.
Yes.
For example, many people are brought up in a Christian context, and they are brought up to believe that when you become an adult, you know, you are a Christian. This is what you're going to be the rest of your life. You get an education in order to get a job, and then you're going to stay in that job for the rest of your life. And we're almost brought up to think that when we reach over, the rest is just cruise control. But what I found, and what it sounds like both of you went through as well, and I know many people have gone through this, is that life is a constant journey. It just never ends.
We're evolving.
And that's why I think it's really important with that idea you both mentioned, that if you see yourself as that your life is a flowing stream, then whatever happens to you, even if it's things that you don't like or that are very traumatic to you, they don't stop you, they don't destroy you, they just cause you to change direction.
Yes.
But you're still going forward. And I look back at my life and I can see that some of the most difficult experiences I had later turned out to be the greatest learning experience.
Right.
And really, it's a blessing in disguise when you are challenged, you know.
Okay, and so now that leads us into frustration, temptation, fear, and anger. I work with a lot of young people who are deliberately seeking a higher spiritual truth and spiritual path, and then they run into these roadblocks of, oh my God, I'm so frustrated, or there's this temptation over here, and they're trying to manage their anger, and they're trying to manage their fears, and they feel absolutely bombarded by them and overwhelmed by them. What suggestion would you have, Dr. Sarah?
Oh, that is, and we are one of those societies that numbs ourselves when everything gets bombarded.
We go and eat junk food.
We eat junk food, and we numb out with TV or video games or
even worse things.
Voices within us grow faint and inaudible.
Yes,
in
the higher
favor
voice
of whatever way
addiction.
We can numb ourselves and not make ourselves vulnerable. But one of the biggest things is to start listening to that inner voice,
the still small voice,
and connecting to you are enough.
Yes. Okay, so when we come back off of a commercial break, you are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia, my co-host, Dr. Sarah Larsen at drsarahlarsen.com, and my co-host, Kim Michaels at transcendencetoolbox.com. And you can find us at DrDoctorParthenia.com. And when we come back, we will be talking more about the ego's traps, the antidotes, and how to manage frustration, temptation, fear, and anger. Turn your mic up. Oh, sorry. We're back with more of Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant and my co-host, Dr. Sarah Larsen, with drsarahlarsen.com, and my co-host, Kim Michaels, with Transcendence Toolbox. And you can find us on the web at Dr., spelled D-O-C-T-O-R, Parthenia.com. You can listen to all of the previous webcasts on there. Today, we are talking about the ego traps and its antidotes and how to deal with some of these traps of the ego, which are frustration, temptation, fear, and anger. And, you know, I think about young people a lot in terms of their frustration levels and not having tools. And there's a very high suicide rate with young people, not just in America, but it's
throughout the world right now.
And a lot of it has to do with their sense of hopelessness and frustration with the world that they're inheriting.
Yes.
So I'd like for us to...
One of the most important things I think we can start saying is don't blame other people and circumstances for what's happening, the emotions and what you're feeling. Instead, really connect in with your own value system
and inner power,
and your own inner power.
Because they feel powerless.
Williamson, in her great Return to Love, talks about and
love that book.
Love the book. It was in that book. She talks about we are bright lights. It's
and we're powerful beyond measure.
That's our true fear, is connecting to that power that's really within us.
But the ego makes you feel so worthless and powerless and helpless.
And part of that is blaming others for deficiencies or the conditions of your life that keep you from feeling and connecting to your own power. Inner power and to your own highest destiny.
So well, okay, I want to piggyback off of that because Paulo Coelho in The Alchemist says that your only obligation is to follow your bliss. He calls it your personal legend. And he says that once you figure out what it is that you're here on this planet to do, he said the whole universe will conspire to make that happen.
Yes.
And Kim Michaels touched on that. So Kim, would you add to this discussion?
Yeah, I think it reaches back to what we said about to thy own self be true and know thyself. So you have to know who the self is. And one of the things that really meant a lot to me when I started my spiritual path was the idea that I was brought up to be a certain way and to live my life a certain way. But I started realizing this was not who I am. This is not how I want to live my life.
It wasn't authentic.
And yeah, because it was just superficial to me. I mean, when I was between 12 and 15, I had a newspaper route. And I would go around, my parents were kind of lower middle class, working class people, but I would go around deliver newspapers in this upper middle class neighborhood. And these were like doctors, high school teachers, priests, whatever, businessmen, you know. And I knew that I was doing well in school. I knew that if I played my cards right, I could one day own a house like that. And I could live there and have a nice car and a nasty dog that ate the newspapers and this kind of thing. But I also realized by going around there every day for several years that I did not want to lock my life into that kind of a mold when I was a teenager.
Behind gates.
It's like your life is just set on this track and there's no room for you.
Right.
And I think that's a lot of this frustration that many people, we desperately try to live up to this image we have been brought up to think we are and how our lives should be. And it just... In today's age, I honestly believe there are many, many people who have come in embodiment for a very specific purpose.
Yes.
And that is to take our Western civilization beyond this materialistic outlook.
Yes. It's so desperately
and
needed.
We simply cannot be satisfied by living this materialistic life.
It's
and
not
I think that's
satisfying.
why a lot of people run these problems, you know, whether it's alcohol, drugs, suicide, but don't feel we can fit into this box that we're put in.
Yes, and they can feel that when they're being disingenuous, and yes. they can feel when people are being phony and inauthentic, and so they're wanting an authentic life. So when we come back after commercial break, and we'll have a much longer segment, I'd like for us to talk about ways that young people can live a more fulfilling, more authentic life. You're listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant and my co-host, Dr. Sarah Larsen, DrSarahLarsen.com, and my co-host, Kim Michaels, at Transcendence Toolbox. Check out those tools on there. Kim, I have to tell you, I'm turning so many people onto them, and they really are empowering and calming when you use them. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Of Divine Love Talk on crntalk.com. And I want to thank our listeners in Houston, Barbara Hollins, and our friends in Nashville and Hawaii and
New Orleans.
Yes.
And, the East Coast, all of those. We heard from some of the Sandy relief people as well.
Oh, wonderful.
In the East Coast, that they have the ability to tune in to CRN digital networks.
So. Yeah, and the beautiful thing about these Android phones is that they're apps, and you can now, anywhere in the world on your Android phone, listen to us.
Yes.
So that's beautiful. Download your apps. Love it. So we are today continuing our discussion on the ego traps and the antidotes and how to deal with frustration, temptation, fear, and anger, because ultimately you just pointed out, Dr. Sarah, that we really want freedom. We want joy. We want bliss. How do we get more of that?
Yes, and we're here in these physical forms. We're here to manifest our heart's desires.
Yes.
And somehow we believe the fear, the anger, all of those energies come in because we forget that we are here to create those.
Yes.
Or feel guilty.
We're looking for other people to do it for us.
Right. And we also get into this mindset of we inherited our personalities.
Mm-hmm. And that they're fixed.
They're fixed. And being able to really be free is actively connecting back into yourself, connecting back to what you want and what you desire, and allowing yourself to expand your frequency,
right,
to receive that, and to really powerfully let go and relinquish all attachments to what came
and limitations
to anything that came before now.
That's really the secret, isn't it? Every day to be renewed in spirit.
To be renewed and present.
Yes.
To take your life force and let go of any ideas. Open yourself up to letting go of who you thought you should be, who your parents or society connected you to, thinking you needed to play this role.
Yeah.
And go completely into, this is what I value.
Yeah.
This is what makes me happy. This is how I feel more connected to myself and to God and
to my true self, and not these insatiable addictions of the ego that end up making you feel empty.
Yes, and Kim Michaels talked about how we think, if we get the degree, we'll be happy.
Get the big house.
We'll finally have arrived.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about arriving somewhere, it's about the process.
Right.
And the process is about being present.
Yes.
And getting a step closer to freedom.
And that is where our freedom lies, is in the present moment, and being able to be fully present without worrying about what might happen in the future or bringing the pain of the past into the present moment. And it's amazing how we can mess up a perfectly good moment by dragging in something that happened years ago that's not even relevant.
A lot of people bring their old relationships into their new ones.
Like big knapsacks.
Yes, big.
Here, let me put this between the two of us, okay? And let's see if you can hop over it.
Right. Instead of really examining and connecting with and loving, opening yourself up what's this person bringing to me every day? And I think you had a question earlier, or we were talking on the break about negativity, other people's negativity. When they bring when someone comes into the room and they bring an energy of negativity, you feel it, but it doesn't have to stay with you.
You don't have to own it.
You don't have to own it. It can breeze through you like a breezy door.
And sometimes you can just look at the person through the eyes of empathy and compassion and just say, are you okay? Are you having a bad day? You look like you're having a rough time. Because sometimes we don't know where that anger and frustration is coming from. And I know one time I did that with someone, and they just burst into tears and said, do you know that nobody has ever stopped and asked me? This is like a perfect stranger out in, in a service job. It's like nobody ever cared to ask me how I was feeling.
Yes.
And so we don't know what burdens people are carrying, and so we can just be gentle with people who are dealing with their anger and frustration.
Right.
And if they're not willing to let it go, then you move out of that space that they're in.
And oftentimes, if someone's frustrated with us or says something, we make it about us.
Oh yeah,
right.
Take it personal.
Did I not do something right?
Yeah.
What is it
what
about?
Did I do?
What did I do? Rather than understanding there's something going on with that person, that and also taking responsibility for ourselves completely. And I don't have to react the way in the past. And it was Mark Twain that said, it doesn't matter what happens, it's how you respond to it. And that's personal freedom and personal integrity.
Choosing how you respond.
Choosing how you respond. And looking through everything from the filter of the universe is conspiring for me.
Yes, not against me.
Right.
Because the ego wants you to believe that it's conspiring against you.
Yes.
So now I know, Kim, you have something to add in terms of ways that we can free ourselves. Because growing up with being on the cusp of the Aquarian age and the dawning of the Aquarian age, I've just so looked forward to this time of we're on this ray of freedom and liberation, and people are demanding that there be no more secrets, and people are demanding freedom. I do believe that it is true that we are in that era of demanding personal freedom and owning it. So, Kim, I'd like for you to address that.
Well, I think what I realized many years ago was that my personal freedom had to start in myself.
Yes.
It had to start by me realizing that I am not the ego. The ego is something in my consciousness that has come to be there. We don't need to go into that because that's a longer discussion, but it's there. And the easiest way to describe it is that it's like a program. And it's just like on your computer. If you click a certain button, the program kicks in. And once the program has kicked in, it's going to keep going like a broken record.
Yes.
I grew up with, my grandparents on my mother's side. They were married for 50 years. And I knew them for probably 25 years out of that time. And all the time I knew them, they were nagging at each other every day. They never actually had an argument, But they were just nagging at each other because my grandmother would make some kind of remark that would make my grandfather upset. He would shoot back at her, and then she would get upset. And all of a sudden, it was just like watching programs that were playing because, Sarah Larsen talked about being present, but they were not present.
No.
They were just nagging at each other. There was just their egos running this program every day for 50 years, And I decided, I didn't know about the ego when I was a child, but I decided, I'm not going to live my life this way, And so I realized I had to find out who am I, what is the ego, and I needed to take command over these ego programs because we talked about it earlier. We are brought up to live our lives a certain way, and what actually happens is that as we are brought up, we create, based on what we get from the outside, we create all these programs in our subconscious mind of how we think we should be. And that's what takes away our personal freedom.
Yes. And Kim, I just want to announce that you are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant and my co-host, Kim Michaels joining us on Skype from Estonia from Transcendence Toolbox, and Dr. Sarah Larsen from drsarahlarsen.com. And you can listen to all of our podcasts on drparthenia.com. You have to spell out doctor. Now, Kim, you made a very cogent point about these loops. And when a person begins to practice being fully present at all times and listening and connecting to what a person is saying, it's startling how many people are caught up in these loops and how they are so not listening to you and they are not responding, and they will say something and you'll say no, or they'll say, did you know such and such a thing? And I'll go, yeah, I'm very familiar with that. And they just keep going instead of going in another direction. And it's a program. And my daughter and I laugh about it because she gets into her program and I have to do this. Crystal, okay, sweetie, I hear you. And we do have to, each of us, become more present and aware when that program is taking over us. And so that's very powerful.
And I think adding in...
Yeah, and I think an important point there is that you can actually, if you decide to be honest with yourself, you can actually learn a lot about your own programs by looking at how you interact with other people. Because there is a certain truth in the saying that like attracts like.
Yes.
In other words, you may not attract people to you who have the exact same program you have, but you will attract people who trigger your programs.
Yes.
And so if you look at your interactions with other people and say, why do I attract to myself a certain kind of person that makes me feel frustrated?
Right.
What is it in myself that makes me feel frustrated when I encounter that person? And I've done that many times in my life, and I really have kind of built the habit of
asking that question.
Because I realized many years ago that, if I want personal freedom, I have to be in control of my own reactions, my own mind.
Yes. Yeah.
And so if I find myself reacting with anything less than love, then I have to look at why, and I have to ask myself, why do I feel so frustrated about this?
And we do, Kim, have to ask better questions like that instead of why me? It's like, okay, what is it in me that's doing that? And so that's very, very helpful in addition to being present. And also what I tend to do when someone is triggering something in me is I ask myself, instead of just responding back at them in frustration or anger, I ask myself, now what would love do in this situation? Sometimes you do need to put people in check, and often it's very important to have the courage and the integrity to shine the light of truth on a situation when other people are being harmed, or when you know that in some kind of way it's going to make a point or it's going to be received. Often I just say nothing because I know that I'm talking to a doorknob. Dr. Sarah.
And I think you hit on two really key points here too. One is the questions. It's always in questions that allows us
you get the answers.
You get another perspective as well. And one way to not bring a defensive person, the Kim Michaels story, the grandparents were defending against being right with one another. And that was the role that they gotten into, proving I'm right or nagging for that I'm right in this area. And so really listening to another person from the perspective of, I'm going to validate what you're feeling so that you can feel like you don't have to defend against me. So your daughter, when she's sharing what she's sharing, and you get across, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, she's no longer trying to prove being right. And she finally lets herself open up to hearing what you have to share and what you have to say. And with my 8-year-old and my 6-year-old, I've really learned this so much that whenever they're acting in a particular way or they're trying to get a need met.
And they need attention.
They need attention, they need certainty, or they need play. They have all of... it is at Tony Robbins that defines 6 basic human needs. And those 6 basic human needs are for certainty. We need to know that the house, the walls are standing.
That we're going to eat.
That we're going to eat. Uncertainty. significance, that we're significant, and connection, that we're connected. Once we get these basic needs met, we can go into contribution and into growth of ourselves. And so if your friends know certainly
that they matter, that they are important and they're significant in your life. Yeah, that is important.
That is the point for communication and connection.
Yeah, and you know, you're really right, because when people do things that look like they are really trying to offend you and insult you, rather than reacting in anger, I will go within, and then at a later time when I'm not charged, I'll go back to the person and go, what was going on with you when you were doing that? Okay, what was your point? Am I missing something here? Can we talk about this so that this doesn't happen again? And when you're talking from I'm ready to listen to you. I'm not attacking you. I just want to know what's going on. Help me here. I really don't understand where that was coming from. Then you can move through that block, and you both grow into a closer relationship and a better understanding, rather than going to that person and accusing and going, why did you say that? And I can't believe you did this. I've done that before. It doesn't work. Kim, could you offer some input there?
Yeah, I think, if we could just realize one thing. In our society, we have all been brought up to believe in one basic lie. And that lie says, my state of mind depends on other people.
Yes.
So the only way to change my state of mind is to try to change other people.
Doesn't work.
If we could just completely stop trying to change others, but instead focus on changing our own reactions and our own programs.
Yes.
What will happen is, I've experienced this many times in my life. As I said, I meet a person, that person makes me feel frustrated. If I stop trying to change the other person, but instead focus on trying to change myself, what usually happens is pretty soon that person just goes away. It just disappears from my life.
Well, I agree. You are listening to Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant, my co-host Dr. Sarah Larsen, and my co-host Kim Michaels. We will be concluding the ego traps and antidotes and more suggestions after commercial break. Thank you for joining us here on Divine Love Talk, and for all of your support out there in our listening audience. Okay, you're back with more of Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant at drparthenia.com, where you can listen to all of the webcasts, and with my co-host, Dr. Sarah Larsen at drsarahlarsen.com, and my co-host, Kim Michaels, joining us from Estonia on Skype at Transcendence Toolbox. Kim, you were talking about communicating how you feel, and it reminded me of Paulo Coelho's book about suicide with young people and insanity, called Veronica Decides to Die. And he said something that was really interesting and kind of shocking, but when I thought about it, I found it to be true. His definition of insanity was the inability to clearly communicate what you are feeling. And if you look at how, at the difficulty that most of us have in giving ourselves permission to tell someone honestly and openly and candidly how we are feeling, you have to give some credence to that definition of insanity, which makes a lot of us definably insane because of our inability to communicate our feelings. And we suppress our feelings and we talk about other people behind their back because we're afraid of being judged, or we're afraid of whatever the reaction is. And I think it does boil down to finding the integrity within and the courage to speak our truth in a very kind way. Kim, we're summing this up. So what closing remarks would you like to leave the audience with today?
Well, I very much agree with that definition, but I would also have to say that the reason why we can't communicate what we feel is that I think we have been brought up not to actually acknowledge what we feel.
Yes.
And if you don't realize what you're feeling, how are you going to tell somebody? You can't even tell yourself. And so I think that really, it really starts with recognizing I want something more in life, and I don't want to live my life based on these programs.
Yes.
And that's where you can then start a path. And transcendencetoolbox.com contains a lot of practical tools where people can start this spiritual path. But what I would like to say in closing is that there is a major program that we have all been brought up to believe in our Western society, and that is the quick fix mentality.
Yes.
Because we've been brought up to think that any kind of change, it should just be a matter of finding the right button to push, and then the change should be instantaneous.
Or the right pill.
And that's not the way it is with the mind, So you have to give yourself some slack. You have to be patient with yourself and realize that whatever obstacle you come to, and you will, of course, encounter obstacles and you will feel frustrated, but you just have to move on. Always take the next step and move on.
You're so right. And we have to develop discipline, and we have to accept that it is a lifelong work that we have to do on ourselves. And Dr. Sarah, I know you.
Want everyone to ask yourself what you have to give away. If you have love and harmony and peace within you, then that's what you're contributing to every situation. And if you've got anxiety, stress, and anger, then that's what you're bringing with you.
And that's what you're going to get back.
And that's what you're going to get back. And it's each thought that develops into a helping, purposeful, loving act is and can be your contribution. So really ask yourself, what am I bringing right now? Am I bringing love and harmony?
And here on Divine Love Talk, it's all about bringing love and harmony and peace.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us on Divine Love Talk on CRN with Dr. Parthenia Grant. And I want to thank my co-host, Dr. Sarah Larsen at drsarahlarsen.com, Kim Michaels at transcendencetoolbox.com. And you can find us on the web at Parthenia.com.
And you can watch this on
YouTube.
On YouTube. Just look for us as
That's
Divine
right.
Love.
Divine Love Talk or Parthenia Grant.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.